So I was coming here in a taxi cab. So this is going to be an improvised question, but it struck me on my way here. And there was a commercial for something, and it said, New York is the greatest city in the world. And the proof of that was that people here in some shops still make handmade flowers. And the other piece of evidence was a guy who was asked what lessons he would share, and he said, if you work hard, you'll get good results. So I thought that those were not the best examples or the strongest arguments for what would make New York the best city in the world. So I wanted to ask you both, what, if New York City is the greatest city in the world, and if so, what makes it the greatest city in the world?
Are you asking me?
Either one. Yeah, both of you.
No, you have to tell which one, because...
Okay, I'll go with you.
Thank you. I think is it the greatest city in the world? I don't know. It's the greatest city in the world where they speak English. Since I'm monolingual, I chose this because I have to be able to overhear other people's conversations. So it is the greatest city in the United States. It's the greatest city in the English-speaking world. It is one, in my opinion, one of only two cities in the United States, the other one being Chicago. Those are the two cities in the United States. There are no other cities. Okay? I mean, San Francisco is some sort of like, adorable little stage set. And Los Angeles is nothing like a city. And that's it.
Okay. Great.
I would agree with the monotheistic, mono-world thing about, I think New York City is a great city if you stay in your house. It just takes, it's a nightmare getting anywhere. End of story. So if you have a nice house, it's great. I don't know, it's like I live in Harlem, so I need like Delta miles to get anywhere. For example, Cooper Union. I feel like the juice of New York City right now is, and I don't want to sound like, like to buy the world a Coke, but it's like sort of the immigrant energy in Queens, in Harlem. I feel like, the downtown thing, I don't even know what downtown means after 1985 or 90 or whatever.
It's a real estate broker's term.
Yeah.
But you said juice, not Jews, right?
I was going to ask
What?
the same thing. So everyone heard that we were clarifying.
You said juice, right?
Not Jews.
I thought you said Jews.
I thought
Hey,
that's what
hey
you were
Fran, did you eat yet?
Sorry?
Did you eat yet?
Did you eat yet? Did you eat yet?
Oh, yeah, mate.
Oh, yeah, I said, well, yeah,
Yeah.
right, right. I thought the Jews of New York.
Like
Yes,
Jew were saying?
yes.
Yes. I would also add it's a mobile city. It's like just neighborhoods get reinvented, and sometimes that's a bad thing. Sometimes that's a good thing. I think when the first wave of bohemians move into like no man's land, there's a lot of energy. They're happy to be there. There's a lot of interaction between the people that have always lived there, and these earnest young white pioneers, let's say. And after that, the white pioneers get kicked out, Extel comes in, and it's all about real estate. And the fund goes out, and people get kicked out.
Someone I'm sure everyone here is a big fan of is Ted Cruz. And he is in the news, obviously, because he's trying to run for president, but also because recently it was revealed that John Boehner called him, I think in what was an understatement, Lucifer in the flesh. There was audio of this. And Ted Cruz, of course, said that he wasn't a fan of New York City values. And there was a big debate over whether that meant gay or Jewish or both, since they're obviously not mutually exclusive. So I wanted to know what you thought he meant, and also how you would define New York City values. You, please.
It depends, like you
You.
can't say what is New York City. I mean, who's New York? I mean, if you think of like, well, who's the most interesting filmmaker in New York? Well, what kind of film? You're talking about Spike Lee's, Whit Stillman's, Martin Scorsese's. It's like New York is like a million, facets. So, what was the question?
What New York values means to you.
I don't know.
Maybe that's, I don't want to put words in your mouth. So.
But I will say this about Ted Cruz. He tried to outlaw dildos when he was a Texas congressman, and his Princeton roommate said, well, he's trying to outlaw self-gratification. I was his roommate for 4 years, and let me tell you, he must have changed his mind about that.
I hope no one's planning to eat anytime soon. He also was in, he was in The Crucible at Harvard Law? He had a part in Arthur Miller's The Crucible, which is kind of ironic. It's an anti-Red Scare allegory. Anyway, Fran, what would you say about New York values, New York City values?
I don't know what he meant. I mean, it used to just mean Jewish.
Right.
That may be anachronistic. But certainly that's part of what he means. To me, here's New York City values. You sit in a subway car, and you see every kind of person on the planet Earth in your car, and you see a girl sitting there with a headscarf, and standing next to her is a Hasid. And if you asked this girl, do you like that Jew? She would say, no, I hate him. If you asked the Hasid, do you like the girl in the headscarf? No, I hate her. However, they don't kill each other. Okay? That's, to me, the great thing about New York. It's not that everyone loves each other. That's not human nature. But it's really rare that you see that type of violence in New York. It's really unusual. Basically, they just sit there thinking, I hate you, that's it, they get off at their stop. And you cannot ask more from human beings than that.
So it's a peaceful zone, relatively speaking.
Think of every kind of person that's in New York, and think of how hard it is to be in New York, and how annoyed everyone is all the time. There is really a very tiny amount of that kind of violence.
Right, because the city would just shut down.
Because people just don't care.
Right.
It's enough to say, I hate you, that's it. They have other problems.
But it would be tiring, too, because there's so much diversity that
it would be
if you don't like
tiring,
people
and it's
other
just
than
not
you-
possible in a place where you have to pay this kind of rent. You don't have time.
Right. You're too exhausted from working so hard, or there's just too much diversity. You'd be physically exhausted if you hate crime, attacked people of different backgrounds. So thank God for that.
I think the most violent entity in New York is the Hampton Jitney.
And the bicycles. Yeah, and the bicycles.
Yeah, I just,
they should put all the bicycles in the Hampton Jitneys, drive them out there, and leave everyone there.
In a camp.
A friend of mine called the Jitney the rolling box of hate.
I'm impressed that they don't all have private planes, though, that they fly out there on.
Different group.
Different group? Okay, got it.
Very different.
So, Fran, you are very expressive about the things that you hate. I think that's a fair statement, right? And it's a compliment.
People have said that to me, but it's not that I try to concentrate on those things. It's just that there are more of them.
Sure. Okay.
Right.
So I know that from your writing and from the documentary about you, you really hate bicycles in New York City, right?
I hate them in their present manifestation. I mean, a bicycle, I know this is against the law to say this, a bicycle is a toy. I had a bicycle. I also played jacks. I played hopscotch, and then I grew up. Okay, so it's not that I understand that it would be better for the air if everyone rode bicycles, and if they want to outlaw cars in Manhattan and everyone ride bicycles, that's okay, but you can't have all these things at once.
Pick a side.
Okay? And the people who are the most affected by the bicycle riders are people such as myself who walk. Okay? Because they don't obey any rules, and because the combination of you being terrified of them because they come from every direction, and an incredible anger at them because that smug look on their face, they act like they're saving the world. I'm on a bicycle. That's how I looked the day my father let go, as I was learning to ride, but so I am opposed to the idea of these bicycles, and I'm also opposed to the idea that with the exact same amount of space we've always had here, we don't have any space. They put all this stuff at once and then take the streets away so people could sit on a lawn chair, in the middle of Times Square. So, we need the streets, okay? I mean, Broadway is a street. Bloomberg took it away. But my favorite thing that Bloomberg, not my favorite, there's so many. Right before Bloomberg left office after his third term, the third term he stole, they finished paving over Times Square, and he stood there and said, and now this is permanent. And I thought, permanent? You hick. Someday there'll be a mayor who will say, let's get this stuff up. And in fact, there was that one moment when Benjamin Bratton, who I never liked, said, maybe we should just rip this up. I thought, yes. But it was too soon, I guess.
Too soon. Hashtag.
Well, you
cheers.
gotta
They're
have
doing
a
it right out in
place
front
for
of here.
Right.
You got to have a place for the painted nude dancers, you know, so they can, you know, hustle in safety.
That's true. That's a good point. So, are there any things that you hate about New York City, that are either new or that have always been here?
I don't know.
No pressure. You don't have to be that hateful. This is a safe space.
I'm not. I mean, I just hate traveling in New York City. I just, you know, there's still an element. I hate real estate scumbags. I hate
Yes,
those
landlords.
buildings on 57th Street. Those,
Yes.
everybody in there is like a war criminal from somewhere in the world, you
right.
know, and they never show up. You know, some Asian woman bought a like $40 million pied-à-terre for her infant because in 18 years, she has decided that the kid's going to go to NYU and he or she is going to need a place to crash. You know, meanwhile, people are getting swept out on Section 8 vouchers, you know, just pushing people around. And I hate the fact there's no middle class. Stuyvesant Town, I think, was the last bastion of middle-class life in Manhattan, and I think that's gone co-op. I don't know, but one thing I do like, and you still have hustle here. You have, you know, like you have, I feel like so goody-goody, I'm talking about the immigrants all the time, but, you know, it's the Africans are on the move. The Asians are on the move. It's hustle, just like it was in 1900. You know, it's the same as like the Lower East Side. It's just a new wave of immigrants dealing with the same shit, getting over here. You know, if I teach a class at Baruch College, which I don't recommend.
Attending or teaching?
Teaching, and there's a writing class, which is like, it's like creative writing, Baruch College. That's like a four-word oxymoron. But it was like the nations represented in that class. It was like that bar in Star Wars, you know, where all the different aliens showed up. I mean, I think there was one kid that was born in America, and they're like Taiwan, Nigeria, Russia, Egypt, bloody. I mean, like 20 kids in 20 nations. And if you gave any one of them less than an A+, they screamed at you, they chased you. You know, it's same old. It's just like the Jews, you know, getting here. It's like anything less than A+ is a failure in their family. So it's the same old, just different faces.
There's a short joke about a guy who seats 3 Jewish ladies to eat at a restaurant. He's a waiter. He sets them up at the table. He leaves. He comes back 5 minutes later and goes, "Is anything okay?"
If we're going to start on Jew jokes, we'll never make it to 90 minutes.
This is a 17-hour marathon.
It's like one hit of crack.
Right.
You can say, "No, I don't want any more."
Or a
thanks."
Pringle. I've never done crack, so for me, it's like a sour cream and onion Pringle. So what you said reminds me of something that I've often thought, which is that if you come to New York City and you're from the Dominican Republic or Poland or Senegal, I think you become a New Yorker much faster than if you come from Wisconsin.
Yeah, because you're so alien, nobody looks down on you for your accent.
Right, because it's such a city of immigrants, right? That's, I think, one of its best
It's
qualities.
either immigrants or war criminals.
Right. Hopefully not from the same country, because that could be awkward. But obviously it is every now and then. If they ran into each other, though, if one was fleeing.
They don't.
Right. Because they don't travel in the same circles?
No, they don't.
They don't go to the same restaurants?
Yeah, I mean, I was in a cab up in Harlem, and the guy that was one of these radio cars. They picked you up on the street, and I think the guy's license said Bokassa. That went right over like a lead balloon. Central African Empire.
Okay. So we're going to talk about gentrification, but I wanted to know if you guys could just set up a little bit about where you grew up and where you've lived over the course of your still very much in progress lives. I didn't want to sound like I was, no, as I started asking the question, I realized that the way it was going to come off may have sounded terminal or something. So anyway.
It's valedictory. You know.
So, Fran, would you like to start with your trajectory, geographical trajectory?
I grew up in New Jersey, in Morristown, New Jersey. I came here when I was 18. The first place I lived for 2 months was a hotel for women called the Martha Washington Hotel. The reason I lived there was because I had a cousin who told my father about this hotel and how my cousin knew about it. There was a very known hotel for women called the Barbizon, but that was very expensive. It was fancy. So my father said, I will pay your rent for 2 months if you live in this hotel for women. So I did. It was a horrifying place. I mean, really scary, horrible place. My room was like this big. There was no bathroom. There was a shower down the hall. There was a bar in the hotel. I was the youngest person there. I was 18. It was mostly like crazy old ladies. And there was a bar, and there was a kind of crazy woman at the bar. She kind of was a bartender. Later, I discovered this woman was Veronica Lake. So that's not anything to do with me, but it's an interesting fact.
Where was this hotel?
It was on
located?
29th Street. It was on 29th between, I think, Lexington Park I think Lexington Park. It was recently renovated. Now it's some incredibly expensive place. I have not been back. Then there was a fairly long period of time where I slept just in other people's apartments. Then I got an apartment on West 4th Street between Jane and 12th. It was a studio apartment. It had no ceiling in the bathroom when I moved in, and 9 years later, when I moved out, it had no ceiling in the bathroom. It also had no kitchen, by which I mean no sink or anything. The sink was in the bathroom. And I lived there for 9 years. Now when I tell people I live there, they go, well, that's such a fancy neighborhood. I said, this building, which is still there, and I'm sure very expensive, all the apartments were studio apartments because it had originally been built as a sailor's rooming house, which is why there were no kitchens.
They weren't intentionally lacking bathroom ceilings,
No,
right?
I think
Okay.
that probably when the sailors lived there was a ceiling, and then the sailors took it down, and they left it without the ceiling. And I lived there, as I said, for 9 years, and the apartment was $121.78 a month when I left. When I moved in, it was $112. That was a lot then, by the way, because most of my friends lived in the East Village. And they would say to me, you are crazy to spend all that money to live in the West Village. If you lived in my neighborhood, you could have 4 rooms for that price.
And a ceiling.
And a ceiling. And I would say, yeah, but I don't get raped. And the West Village was safe. It was, from a point of view of that, it was safe. It was safe for girls. I was a young girl. It was safe for girls to walk around. It was safe. And the East Village was absolutely not. So I never lived there. And then I moved from there when I had money, and then it's less interest because, but I was doing an interview with a guy on the phone from a gay Swedish magazine, a gay magazine in Sweden, of which there are hundreds, which is surprising since it's a tiny country. And this kid said to me, so when you were young, you lived in the West Village because it was bohemian, right? I said, no. We lived in the West Village because it was cheap. It was bohemian because we lived there. So there's no such idea now, I don't suppose. And people are constantly asking me, if you were young, would you do this? And I have no idea what I would do if I was young. I wouldn't be me. I mean, the person I am now, I can't imagine, no, of course, I have no idea. Because someone who's 18 now would never turn out to be me. They turn out to be someone who's 18 now. So I have no idea. But I had no problem adjusting to life in New York in the sense that I could not wait to get here. I mean, I was really happy to be here. And the kind of physical unpleasantness of my life was fine.
What did you do during the winter about the ceiling? Sorry, I'm kind of haunted by
But when I
this.
say no ceiling in my bathroom, not in the building. So you saw the rafters.
Got it. Okay.
I was on the second floor.
Got it.
So, I mean, there's a ceiling on the building. I'm sure it's the same one. That's usually called a roof. So
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I totally confused roof and ceiling.
No, it was just
but-
ceiling in the
It's like
bathroom.
ship and boat.
Yeah.
Yep.
And what about you, Richard, your
Well, I grew up
journey, geographical?
I grew up in I started out in what is now known as the South Bronx, which is a journalistic term. It was either East Bronx or West Bronx. And East Bronx was really working class. West Bronx, maybe your teacher lived there, But I only lived there for a year in the building. When I was born, I lived for 2 years. there. And in the building, apparently, Leon Trotsky had lived there in 1917 when he
Quite a
was
year.
trying to get back to Russia as the revolution broke out. But, like, you know, sort of like Veronica Lake, you know.
Very similar.
It's like, did you know?
Right.
But I grew up for 18 years. I grew up in the Parkside housing projects in the Bronx on White Plains Road. And projects in the 50s and 60s, you know, there was an idealism and a certain social engineering thing of trying to get working families a home that's affordable, that has landscaping and gardens and playgrounds. And it was okay. I mean, it's just, you know, it's a working class environment. It was racially mixed, increasingly so. And then when Co-op City opened up in the Bronx and 60,000 people all over New York City fled, they played Exodus on the Cross Bronx Expressway. And everybody who could move out of the projects all over moved because you could buy an apartment for $3,000. And the projects became increasingly ghettoized year after year. But my experience of it was, you know, everybody was working, you know, families were relatively intact. Yeah, I'm not saying people were not fighting to death in the home, but it was an okay place. Then I went upstate for 4 years for college. When I came back down, I really wanted to move to, had to move to Manhattan. I was going to Columbia. And I moved 106 in Amsterdam in 1973, and that was Wawa pedal blaxploitation time. And there was a dead body in the hallway. I moved in, and there was like shots fired outside the house. It turns out that they were making a movie outside the house, but the dead body was real.
Oh.
And I
got my
just
hopes
said,
up.
"Man, this is great." During the 70s, I was in occult therapy, and there's a to be continued about that. And, you know, everybody lived, like, you know, 5 guys would split an apartment. So we had, like, you know, doorman pre-war buildings on West End Avenue. My share of the rent was like $125, which is fine since I was making $126 a week. Then the Village, Great Jones Street, which is not great, Jones Street, which was great because it was the street on the cover of Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, where he's sort of with that great long-haired girl, you know, shivering
Suze
against.
Rotolo. Suze Rotolo, the artist.
Suze Rotolo, that Scott Spencer wrote a novel about. So I lived there. That was cool. And then I saw my first loft, and well, actually, that was earlier in the 70s when I saw lofts. It was this sculptor, Peter Reginato, and I never saw a loft before. Where's your walls? You know, and well, that's the whole point. Where
Sailors
I
took 'em.
couldn't get over. There were no walls. I didn't get it. And then at some point, you know, I was living in Gramercy Park when I was making good screenwriter money, so I had a beautiful house there. But my writing's all like ghetto, you know, urban trenches, working class and below. And I just, you know, Gramercy Park was just so freaking boring. And now I live in Harlem, where, you know, it's every time I walk out of the house to get a paper, I come back with like a chapter. But, you know, I feel like really engaged there. I feel like now finally I found a home. And that's my story.
And were you raised in Morristown, New Jersey? Is that suburban or is that urban?
No, I mean, we think of it as a suburb. I mean, it really was more like a small town.
Okay.
I mean, it's close to New York. It's only 40 miles. But my father had a shop. He was an upholsterer in the town, so he wasn't a commuter. And it really seemed like a small town more than a suburb of New York, you know. But it certainly is not a city.
And do you remember the first time you started fantasizing about living in New York?
I didn't fantasize. I just said I'm going to live in New York. It wasn't the kind of thing you ought to keep secret. It wasn't.
Right.
We
No,
used
not-
to. I mean, when I was we used to come to New York often, pretty often. And when I was a little kid, for our birthdays, we could choose something to do, and I would always choose to come to New York. And I would choose to like go to the Museum of Modern Art, and to go to Angelo's, which was a restaurant in Little Italy, which is actually still there, although I have not been to it. And sometimes we'd be in New York at Christmas time. I just told this to someone this Christmas, and we would go to FAO Schwartz, which just recently closed. But when I was a child, it was across the street from where it ended up being. And I had no idea it was a store. It never occurred to me children owned those things. I thought it was a museum, like the Museum of Modern Art. Like, yeah, they had cars, like a car that you could drive, like a little Jaguar, and giant like giraffes. And I would have said, let's go to FAO Schwartz. And my parents didn't mind taking me because I never asked for anything, because it never occurred to me that people owned these things. So that's the kind of delightful child I was, in case you were wondering.
Easy.
So I love New York because it had a museum with toys in it. It had, and it was, I didn't dislike where I lived as a child. I mean, as a child, I enjoyed living there because you're tremendous, and I had a bicycle because I was a child. And once you had a bicycle, you could go wherever you wanted. No one cared where you were. We were never allowed to stay in the house. Not like now where parents are on top of their children. Like if you were sitting in the house for 2 seconds, my mother would look like you. What do you do? Get out of the house. They didn't want to see you. So we had a lot of freedom. We could drive around on our bicycles, and I enjoyed living there as a child. As a teenager, it was horrible. I mean, I think, but I think like really, yes, it's horrible to be a teenager. At least it was for me and for most people. But these kind of environments are just deadly for teenagers. There's just, so then I started going to New York all the time.
So you would go while you were still living in
Yeah, I'd go on Saturdays. I would go,
And in all fairness, I just want people to know, you don't only think bicycle riding is okay for children. From what I remember from an interview, you also think people can ride bikes, just they should move to Seattle or Portland.
No, they should stay. I mean, if you're that kind of person,
Right.
you have these places.
Right. Right. I know, I agree.
Seattle or Portland, I know there's supposed to be some vast difference between them. I can't remember what it is. But yes, there's whole parts of the country, where I guess they invented it there or whatever, and go be there.
Right. They hate us for our lifestyles.
I
or
don't
our
care.
way of life.
There are all kinds of people in the world, okay? But to try to turn New York into that, it has not worked. It's not going to work. It just is annoying.
You guys should form an organization, anti-bicycle, ABO or something. Were you going to say something else?
Just going to throw bags of gorp at everybody speeding through Central Park. I have to say, just one last thing is, growing up in the Bronx, to come into Manhattan, or Manhattan meant Times Square, when I was a teenager, I felt like Jed Clampett. I mean, we would go in the 60s, we would go to see the latest James Bond movie playing at these Titanic, the Roxy, or these big movie palaces that don't exist anymore. And we just, like, 8 o'clock in the morning, we'd, like, line up and go get in the subway. And, it just felt like, golly. Just all it meant was movies. There was an old chain of bookstores called Bookmasters. That doesn't exist anymore. I go there. I had like my touching points: Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum, Hubert's Flea Circus, and my grandfather would take me like at 6 or 7 to Grant's Bar, which is a sawdust bar on 42nd and 7th. He'd put me on a stool and he'd get hammered on Fleischmann's whiskey. Just cool.
Family fun.
But really, just New York City is Manhattan. Everything else, I mean, the outer boroughs are kind of like a no man's land between New York City and America, where it's kind of New York City, kind of not. But I always feel like I live in the country of New York.
Yeah, I do too. When I'm traveling and people ask me if I'm American, I say I'm New Yorker.
I always say Canadian because I don't know
Oh, yeah.
who I'm talking to.
That's a safer bet, yeah. Especially with Ted Cruz around. You never know what's going to happen. Yeah, I'm the product of a mixed marriage. My mom is Bronxian, and my dad is Queensian, but I was born and raised in Manhattan. And I don't think my teenage period, the era in which I was a teenager was that painful or miserable for me, but I'm not sure how much that has to do with...
You really need therapy then, because you really need to...
I missed out, right?
Anybody who tells me they had a great time as a teenager
Well, that's
really
the thing.
needs
People would
to talk.
When you meet people from other cities or states, and they learn that you grew up in New York City, I think they assume that it's like the Wild West, and you're getting mugged a couple times per block, and doing like heroin and crack in an alley or something. And I was like going to the Angelica. I think the movie theater or the Lincoln Plaza one on the Upper West Side.
The broken escalator.
Yeah, exactly. The
And
small
everybody
one.
going to the theater is like 80 years old.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So the volume
Somebody
is up high.
coughs and everybody's, stop coughing.
But I always think that it's, you're way more likely to be drawn into a life of crime or delinquency or whatever if your options are like meth and a pony farm to observe or something. I don't know enough about pony farms to even know the verb.
People leave New York because they don't want the kids to get into drugs, which is like, well, fill in the blank, but I mean, I think the suburbs is much more dangerous with drugs because there's nothing to do.
I agree. It's just deadly.
Right.
But and also now, I mean, pretty much American manufacturing has been replaced by mega churches and meth labs.
Right.
It's meth.
That's the whole country
Which
now.
is worse?
Which do I think is worth? I think they're pretty similar. Okay, and I think their candidate is Ted Cruz. I mean, and that's what he means by New York values, not these values of meth labs and.
Yes, the whole country
churches.
turned into Bethlehem. The Rust Belt is just pure
Yeah.
meth.
Meth belt. When do you remember starting to talk about or hear about gentrification for the first time? Not in an academic sense or intellectual sense per se, but kind of when your friends started talking about it, when you started noticing it?
People notice real estate only if they're looking. I mean, if you are, having a problem, you got to move. That's, I mean, at least for me. I mean, for me, I have no interest in real estate as a subject, which makes me maybe different from many New Yorkers. But in the last several years, I've had a huge number of housing problems, and I've been moving and moving and moving. And I wish I knew less about real estate. Okay, but it is not an interesting subject to me, the way money is not. I mean, to me, the great thing when I was young that really is different from now is that I don't remember ever talking about money all the time. It is so boring. Like, it's math. Like, I was bad at it then, I'm bad at it now, and I don't want to think about it. To me, gentrification, I don't know when the word came. It's a horrible word. I don't know when it came
Comes
about.
from people of gentle birth.
Well, that's a really unlikely thing to happen here. I mean, real estate, has always defined New York. I mean, the Dutch, from the time of the Dutch,
And and Columbus.
and the Dutch. I mean, the real estate interest has always run the city, basically, but it is, of course, completely out of control now. I mean, completely out of control. And the buildings that Richard was talking about, like on 57th Street, they're literally empty. I mean, they're sold, but they're empty, and they're not like that blue building, which I
It's
forget.
money laundering.
Yeah, that blue building, it's just a washing machine. It's a giant washing machine. And sometimes I walk, Pastor, I walk around all night, and I see people sleeping in front of it on the street. And I think, what, fellas, it's empty in there. Go on in. And not only will you be inside, you're going to have a view. Yeah. I mean, those buildings, when you watch them build these new buildings, especially these glass ones, which are basically built out of like kind of Scotch tape and glass, all I could think about is, well, when they come down, which will be soon, they're going to be really easy to take down.
Like a washing machine.
Yeah.
Dismantle.
I wish everybody in those buildings were actually there and then the building fell down. The world would be a better place.
That would be fantastic.
So we
or
have
that
to-
one on 57th Street on Park Avenue, which you can see from the Eiffel Tower. I mean, I am sure that that you can see it from outer space. Someone told me this recently that something like the first 40 floors. I don't know how many floors there are. The first 40 floors, there are no apartments in that building. The first 40 floors are amenities for the other 70 floors or whatever.
I can't even think of 40 amenities.
I can't either. I said, what does that mean? How many
Floors of
kinds of
amenities.
spas can there be?
A eucalyptus one, a lavender one.
Yep. So
Like
that's
a dog therapist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, when I was a little kid.
bike
so,
room.
What'd you say?
Bike room.
Oh, yeah. When I was a little kid, I remember on the Upper West Side, my dad was driving me to school, and we passed by a pet shop, and it said, "Keep 'em warm and toasty." And it was like Pets Central or something, "Keep 'em warm and toasty," and it had a picture of some kind of cute little like hoodie or blanket for a dog, and underneath it was a homeless man sleeping. It was like you couldn't make.
It's more like one of
Make
those
it up.
ironic Depression era. You know, there's a food line and a big billboard with happy family in a car saying, you know, it's great to be in America. or
Right.
something like that.
So I'm actually surprised that you said you aren't interested in real estate or gentrification, because it seems like from Fran, I was watching some talk that you gave at some anti-NYU event, and you were very impassioned about it.
No, I didn't say I wasn't interested in the problem of it. I said I'm not interested in real estate as a subject.
Right.
Because the interest in real estate as a subject is, you can see that a lot of people, even if it's hurting them, they're excited by the idea. They're excited by, this apartment costs $40 million. What does that mean? How can an apartment cost $40 million? You know, no, I'm interested as a subject. Yes, I am.
Got it. You're just not interested in speculating.
Yes, that is correct.
And what about you? I mean, people refer a lot to Lush Life and how
Yeah,
much that
well,
deals
the
with.
thing is, I never really thought about gentrification before because I never lived among people that weren't in some way kind of like me, you know. But, you know, my family came from the Lower East Side, just like everybody else's, and I didn't know anything about the Lower East Side except for the sentimental stories, you know, oh, we took in boarders and, you know, we slept on the roof. And then all of a sudden, my kids, who were like early teenagers, they knew all about the Lower East Side, but what they knew about the Lower East Side is where to go, where you won't get carded, you know, the hip restaurants. And then it kind of made me nuts because of, you know, it's like their great-grandfather, they're just walking through his ghost to get to the juice bar.
Jews or juice?
Both.
Back.
So I decided, listen, I really want to write. When I got down to Lower East Side, and the whole phenomenon of it, it's become the Creamy Golden Center, Orchard, Ludlow. It became like sort of like a child-safe zone. And, you know, the entrepreneurs were moving in and this and that. And then when I got down there, I saw there's all these entities. You had the Fujianese Chinese, you had the Cantonese Chinese, you had the Orthodox Jews. You know, you had the Dominicans, the Puerto Ricans, the black, the housing project people. You know, you had the hipsters. And it was really like, but it just seemed to me that I watched things change and people get booted out. So other people, what happens is like, you know, when the artists go in there because they're looking for cheap space and maybe a little egalitarian thrill, you know, a living among the underclass. You know, like I said, they're okay. But once the real estate people, they start smelling cappuccino, all is lost. So, yeah, and also I'm a gentrifier. I'm in Harlem, and I own a home. But I did buy it from another gentrifier. And before that, it was abandoned, but that's just making excuses. It's something that really sort of stays with me all the time. I was walking around Harlem about 3 days ago, and they give Harlem walking tours. So you got all these Nebraskans standing in front of the Apollo, you know, and this tall black woman is saying, well, and now we're in front of the world-famous Apollo, you know, Michael Jackson, blah, blah, blah. And then she started talking about what's happening in Harlem. And she said, well, gentrification is a double-edged thing. On one hand, there's lower crime, probably because there's more white people, you know, more cops. Where white people go, cops will follow. You know, she said there's a lot of anxiety and anger from the people that feel like they're getting priced out. She said, at some point, I was hoping there was going to be like this stasis between, you know, bohemians and middle-class people who spend money and, you know, the born-here Harlemites. Then she said, I saw that Whole Foods going up at 125th and Lexington. She looked at the people and said, that's a wrap. And she just walked away from the whole group.
Yeah, that is an ominous sign, because the guy who owns Whole Foods, it's not just a big, huge chain, but isn't he anti-Obamacare? Isn't he
I don't know
anti-health
what
care?
He was a big supporter of Mitt Romney.
Shouldn't that be enough to get it shut down?
You know,
Like a
the
health
truth
code
is that people
violation?
in New York are so happy to have any place nearby to buy food.
Right.
They don't care. Because when you think about it, there's whole parts of New York where there's no place to buy food.
Well, what Harlem has always been a desert, you know, but you know there was a big associated or a path market, 125th in Lexington, that was sold by Calvin Butts in the Abyssinian Baptist Church to Extel. So, and that was pretty much the only place you can get fresh vegetables. And
Calvin
if you want to
Butts.
buy a banana, that's the only place. You know, otherwise you go to like bodegas and corner stores. So that's going away, and the Whole Foods is going up. So, you know, and it's not as simplistic as that, but, you know, that's the wave of the future.
So what is the most kind of heartbreaking instance of gentrification that you've witnessed? Either something closing down, people you know being forced out of somewhere. What's a personal experience you've had with it? Any restaurants, hospitals?
St. Vincent's Hospital.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, this is why when I look for apartments and the real estate broker goes, you know, but that is landmarked, or that, I always go, St. Vincent's Hospital. Michael Bloomberg handed his friend, Billy Rudin, here's St. Vincent's Hospital. You can have it. There's no
Take my hospital.
There's no hospital in that neighborhood. I mean, someone should make a list of all the hospitals that closed under Bloomberg. You know, the health mayor. You know, his idea, the health mayor, that, you know, you can't smoke, you can't eat salt, you know, but
Can't go to the
No hospital
but you can't go
either.
to the hospital. So
He's using it as to motivate people to
yes,
eat
that's it.
healthily.
He's pure of heart. Because obviously they were looking at St. Vincent's Hospital and thinking, this is now very expensive real estate. We can't let just sick people come here. You know, I mean, the same thing on I went to visit someone who was in New York hospital. I went into her room. The views that she had from this room, you know, over the East River, I thought they would never let them put a hospital here. Now, they're probably trying to figure out a way to get this hospital down so they can put condos here, you know. But I think St. Vincent's Hospital, I mean, was pretty high on the list. The fact that you could, and I'm always hoping that one of those people will have a heart attack, and they're not going to be able to get to the hospital fast enough. I was standing on Bank Street one night smoking a cigarette, because you can't smoke in the restaurant, and I saw a guy come out of his house, put a golf bag, or what do you call it? Is that what you call it?
Golf club bag.
Golf club bag, into the back of his Range Rover. And I thought, am I in Greenwich Village or Greenwich, Connecticut? And now I realize they're the same.
Yes.
They're the same.
Well, I would say when the Diocese in New York started shutting down churches, and they hired a public relations firm, they shut down half the Roman Catholic churches in Harlem. And to sell it to the people, they hired a public relations firm to come up with the phrase, making all things new, which means, you
New
know,
Testament.
you've been evicted from the church that you've been going to for 50, 60 years. And the church next to my house, it's called All Saints. It was built by when that part of Harlem was in about 1880. It was an Irish kleptocracy, which is to say all the guys who dipped their beak at Tammany Hall, this, you know, and they wanted to differentiate themselves, you know, from the shanty Irish in Pigtown, which is near 125th in Amsterdam back then. They built the church, and it was $2 million in 1879 money, and it's landmark. Renwick built it, you know, and the church. Listen, you got to pay off for all those priests, and
Lawsuits.
you have $2 billion worth of real estate in New York, and they saw this church. It's almost like a city block, and they were down to 200 people, not prosperous Irishmen now, but pretty much, you know, immigrants, you know, West African or African American, you know, all kinds of Hispanic, you know, but it's kind of like small congregation, dwarf, like a Piranesi, you know. It's like 200 people in a church built for 2,000. Nonetheless, it was their home. And they just shut the damn thing down. It's all these 85-year-old women who've been going there, who were married there, who taught religious instruction there, taught the children of the children who they taught catechism to or whatever. I'm kind of like non-religious, you know.
You don't go to church?
I do. I went to that church because my wife's writing a book about it. But it was really hard what they did. And it's real estate. You know, they want the space. They have all this property, and they're not going to keep it open for a bunch of fuck-ups, basically. I don't care what they say.
So that kind of brings up the role of government, right? And what do you think the mayor, for example, should do? De Blasio, has he done enough? How much better is he than Bloomberg and Giuliani at dealing with, I know there's your two, who do you hate more, by the way, Bloomberg or Giuliani?
Bloomberg. Bloomberg. I mean, I hate both. I've hated like every mayor of my lifetime practically, except David Dinkins.
Yeah.
I mean, I basically, and I'm always thinking, I could never hate a mayor. I could never hate a mayor more than Ed Koch. Then we had Giuliani. I could never hate a mayor more than Giuliani.
Bloomberg, right?
Then we had Bloomberg. You know,
They are
so
exceptional.
I know, no one I know agrees with me. I kind of like de Blasio because his heart's in the right place.
Yeah,
You know, I
exactly.
mean, he's not the smartest man who ever lived. You can see that. I mean, I was a supporter of Bill Thompson, you know, who would have been, I think, a much better mayor, and he was certainly much smarter. And, you know, I was always convinced my friends, and they kept saying, but Bill Thompson, he's boring. And I kept saying, so what? You know, the mayor doesn't have to be entertaining. New York is full of entertaining people. You know,
Look elsewhere.
yeah, I mean, it was really not, but you know, there's certain things that de Blasio has done that I just loved him for. Like, you know, the day that he went into this big rant about the guys who dry the cars in the car wash. Are you kidding me? Can you imagine Bloomberg even knowing about such a thing? You know, I love him for that. There's a lot of things I don't like about him. I mean, he certainly is, you know, he certainly is very friendly to real estate interests. There's no question that that's true. He was for that garbage transfer station, you know, on the Upper Side. I was against that. Bill Thompson was against that. You know, I don't adore him, but I like him a lot more. You know, Michael Bloomberg should never have been the mayor of New York. First of all, he's not a New Yorker. He doesn't live in New York. He's never lived in New York. No one that rich lives anywhere. You know, someone that rich lives nowhere.
And everywhere, right?
You know, I mean,
They're
so,
mobile.
and his, I hated every single thing about him. So I much prefer de Blasio. I would have even have preferred whoever ran against him, who I can't remember because no one voted for him.
Bernie Sanders, I think.
No, Bernie
Oh,
Sanders.
that's de Blasio's.
I mean, you know, this thing that is happening to Blasio now, I don't quite understand it, but I'm certain that Andrew Cuomo is the one orchestrating it.
Oh,
You know, it's
yeah.
my dream is to live long enough to see a New York City cop with his hand on the top of Andrew Cuomo's head, putting him into the back of a cop car. That is my
Oh
dream.
my God, that would be amazing. And you? Do you any strong feelings about any New York politicians?
I like Fiorello LaGuardia.
Me too. He was great. My mom
And-
taught at LaGuardia Community College, actually. My mom taught at LaGuardia Community College.
Oh, so did I.
Oh,
Maybe I knew her. Maybe I dated her.
maybe. You could be my father.
Save a milk bottle
Pops.
on me. What are you doing out so late?
Interviewing you.
Oh, I guess that's okay. I don't know. You know, I don't really listen. I agree. De Blasio, his heart's in the right place. He's going to screw up because it's impossible not to screw up in New York City. This, you know, just the hostility. You can't make everybody happy, and it's like war. You're going to make mistakes, and the wrong people are going to get killed. But by and large, you know, I like where his heart is, and I'm not really that smart around political issues. I like Dinkins, you know, and I agree. You know, you don't have to be a big personality. You know, just because you capture the hearts of the tabloid editors doesn't make you a good mayor. So, yeah, I like Lindsay.
I like Lindsay too.
Yeah, because he looks so Jewish, you know.
I didn't live through him.
When I was 15 in Jerome Avenue in the Bronx, Abe Beam, who's about 4'0", was campaigning on Jerome, and he came and he shook my hand, and all I could think of is this guy's really old and I'm taller than him. But I was too young to vote.
How old were you when that happened?
15.
I remember as a kid not getting that people who could be taller and younger.
My little sister is 6 feet tall, and so I got used to
You
it
got
at a
over
young
that?
age. Yes.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the presidential elections, just because it happens to be that it's between, on the Democratic, well, both of them actually. We have 3 New Yorkers, maybe 2 New Yorkers, depending on how you define it. I certainly would define it as 2 New Yorkers in the presidential race so far, still. Did you guys vote?
Yeah.
Did you vote in the primary? You don't have to tell me for whom, but.
Of course I voted. I
Okay.
voted in every election.
Okay.
I am a fantastic voter. Okay? I voted in every election since I'm 21, because when I was that age, you couldn't vote till you were 21. The voting age is now 18, I know. Yes, I vote in every single election. I'm a fantastic voter. I don't mean from a fantastic point of view of choosing winners. I've been pretty bad about that, but I vote, okay? Bernie Sanders is not a New Yorker, okay? What kind of person leaves New York when they're 18? Leaves
He
New
was
York when they're
older.
18.
He was older.
Someone who looks around and goes, I can't make it here. I'm going to Vermont, where there's 6 people. He is a small-time guy.
Wait.
I don't like him.
I think Hillary Clinton,
She's not a New Yorker either.
but she goes, what'd she say, home sweet home, it's good to be home?
Bad news
I
for
was
everybody.
Like, are you in
There's
Illinois
only one New
right
Yorker.
now?
It's Donald Trump. Okay, he's a bad New Yorker.
Yeah, but he's very New Yorky.
But he's a
He's the ultimate New Yorker.
Exactly.
He's a hustler. He's full of shit. He doesn't believe anything he says.
Right.
He doesn't believe anything. That's
Right.
the good thing about him as a Republican.
Yeah.
He doesn't believe in the stuff they believe in. He believes
Right.
in nothing at all.
Yeah.
No, he
I
doesn't.
mean, he's way less scary, I think, than Ted Cruz would have been.
Well, Ted Cruz really believes
Exactly,
in
right.
what
He's an ideologue.
So, first of all, if Trump gets nominated, that'll be great. Because
Great. I agree. Fantastic. It's my dream.
I think I would vote for Hillary Clinton because she's the least worst.
Oh,
You know,
you mean because Bernie Sanders won't make
I
it?
think
or?
he's idealistic. He'll never get anything done. You
He
know,
cannot
like
be
very
the
young
president.
people like him, just
Why?
like I liked Eldridge Cleaver in 1968 and the
He's
Peace
called
and
the
Freedom
Amendment
Party.
King.
Excuse me. Bernie Sanders could not be the president. Could not. I don't mean he couldn't be elected. He could not be the president.
Why? 'Cause he'd lose
Well,
stuff?
first of all, he doesn't seem to know there are other countries in the world beside the United States. All right. Last week, did you see those images of Obama meeting with the King of Saudi Arabia? Do you think Bernie Sanders is a match for the King of Saudi Arabia? I'm telling you, he is not. Okay? He knows nothing about the
Yeah, but-
world. He's like the world's oldest 18-year-old. You know, he's like, so of course the kids, who go to his rallies, they love him, of course, because they're in college and he goes, college should be free. If he said, co-ops in Manhattan should be free, I'm voting for him.
What? Sorry, I couldn't hear you. If he said what?
If he said co-ops in Manhattan should be free, I would be for him too.
Are you listening, Bernie?
You know,
So you could get
he's not
Fran's
going to be the president. I'm glad he was in the race. The last couple of weeks, I really disliked him. Because to say Hillary Clinton is unqualified to be the president and he's qualified is just an absurd thing to say. I don't like Hillary Clinton either. No one does. It doesn't distinguish you to say you don't like Hillary
Right.
Clinton.
It's
I
more
don't
like
like
there's
Bill
something
Clinton.
wrong with
I
you
don't
if you
like any
do.
of the Clintons. I don't like Chelsea Clinton. Okay? I'm
I
sure
feel bad
that
for
little
her, though.
is about to embark on a career. I don't like her either. So, but you do feel that Hillary Clinton could have a meeting with the King of Saudi Arabia without being eaten alive like Bernie
Right.
Sanders would. I mean,
But she's
there's no
probably
American
more
president.
trigger-friendly when it comes to bombing.
I'm
That's-
sorry?
That's my thing with the foreign policy debate is that, of course, she's experienced. There's no doubt about it. I just don't like most of her experience.
Well, I don't like her
Decision.
foreign policy. No, I don't like her
Right, 'cause
policies.
He's the least worst.
I mean, she is, yes, of course. We all remember her voting for the war in Iraq. I definitely remember that. I remember watching it because it was live on C-SPAN. I was a little surprised, I have to say. And also because I remember the time people saying she had to do it, she's a woman, I said, no, she meant it. I think she meant it. I do. She's pretty hawkish.
Yeah.
Especially, but I never really thought of the Clintons, either one of them, as Democrats.
Right.
They seem to be, to me, like Republicans. I mean, they're a little to the right of, say, Nelson Rockefeller.
No, it's true,
And
yeah.
so the good thing, yes, about Bernie Sanders is that he has pushed her to the left, and
He's kept her honest.
yeah, I mean, he's pushed her to the left, and I don't believe, like other people believe, that she's going to be able to renege on all these things. She's not. Because also she sees the future. You see that all these kids that go to his rallies, although they know nothing, they are the only possible future Democrats. So she has to, give something to people who are living the world that she and Bill Clinton made. which is very bad for people who are young.
Right.
So I understand
he's
that.
pulling her to the left. She's almost at the center now.
Not quite.
But it's funny. I think that once you're a New Yorker, I don't know what the cutoff is, but I think it's very hard to become a non-New Yorker, because Bernie Sanders, for instance, and obviously you can tell I'm a little bit biased towards him, but that aside, he can't go anywhere without sounding like a New Yorker.
He sounds like an old-fashioned. No one sounds like that now.
My uncle.
No, he
Yeah.
sounds like
Yeah. But
pastrami
he's-
king.
Yeah. I mean, your uncle must be that age. In other words, there's no young kids sound like that. That's
Maybe it's a time
those
capsule.
New York
He's,
accents.
he's that grandpa.
Right. I love that accent.
Yeah,
though.
those New York accents are all gone. I mean, not just that particular Brooklyn accent.
Except for on TV sitcoms.
Yeah, but I mean, in real life, when I was younger, there was an actually Upper East Side accent. You know, and you could. There's still old people who talk like that.
Was
But-
it a
Long
waspy
Island
one?
lockjaw.
Yeah, but there are no young people who talk like that. You know, everyone kind of sounds the same now because of, I guess,
Right.
watching television. But that Bernie Sanders, yeah, he sounds like some of my relatives.
Right.
You know, but he doesn't sound like anyone young.
Right. What was the Upper East Side accent like? I don't even know what ethnic.
I'm not a
You're
good mimic, so I won't be able to
But
do it for you.
Is it a waspy thing, a Jewy thing?
No, it's a waspy thing.
Waspy, okay.
Oh, yeah.
It's called Long Island lockjaw, and I can't imitate it. But
it's
I,
like
I know how, I know
close
it when I hear it.
jaw? Okay. Can you guys tell the difference between a Bronxian or a Brooklynite accent?
No.
No.
I mean, maybe of that age. I mean, we didn't have any relatives in the Bronx. We had relatives from Brooklyn.
Right.
Some of them sound like Bernie Sanders. Not as smart, but they sounded like him,
Right.
the accent.
And what about what it takes to become a New Yorker or be a New Yorker? So you, in your NYU, anti-NYU rant, which I say that with a lot of, I mean, it's a compliment. It's a great rant.
Yeah.
Said
Of course.
that the students are tourists, that they have no connection to the city.
Well, because people this was a protesting that, giant building project in the middle of on 4th Street, Mercer Street. And everyone who was speaking against it seemed to find necessary to say before they spoke, of course I love NYU. And, when I got up to speak, I said, I don't love NYU. Why do you love NYU? What is there to love about it? First of all, what is a college doing in the middle of Manhattan? They treated, I lived on East 4th Street then, so they treat the kids, the students, treat that like a campus. They never, very rarely would go, east of Lafayette, or west of 6th Avenue. And I thought, why don't they just move it upstate, where there's lots of land, and leave New York to people who deserve to live here, which is not them. Okay,
Well,
because
they already have a campus in Dubai.
yeah, why don't
Maybe
they go
they
there?
Yeah.
That delightful place. I really don't understand why they feel entitled to this, but they certainly feel entitled. Okay, and it's incredible. I didn't realize how expensive NYU was. When I was young, NYU was much smaller, first of all. And there was parts of NYU there, but they didn't make a nuisance of themselves. It was just like a few buildings. They didn't take over the whole place. It didn't have that feeling to it where they're being catered to, it really is angering. It's like, I don't know how many people are there, but it's like 20,000 spoiled brats taking up real estate that should be available to adults.
And getting discounts on things.
Oh yeah, there's always signs everywhere. And what, half off the hamburger's only $25 instead of $50.
They could lower the price on everything for us if they didn't cater to them. Literally cater.
And also, we wouldn't have to, to me, the worst thing is, listen, I can't help it because I'm an inveterate eavesdropper. So to hear them talking, I would walk behind them or in front of them and they'd be telling each other what they were doing. And I had to restrain myself from saying, no, you're not. No, that's not going to happen to you. Absolutely out of the question, let me assure you. I didn't do this.
That would be amazing if you did follow them around.
Oh, no,
and
I
just
felt like they were
responded.
following me. I'm sorry.
And you said that they weren't citizens of New York.
They're not New Yorkers. They are like tourists, by which I mean they're transitory. They're coming here, they're paying, I know it's very expensive to go to school there, but it's much cheaper than actually living here. Even if it's $60,000 a year and they get a place to live, are you kidding me? You think you could live in that neighborhood if you made $60,000 a year? Not a chance. Yes, they're transitory, they're like tourists, and they should be treated that way.
On the other hand, I would say that, New Yorkers come to New York to go to school. They fall in love with New York. Cut to 20 years later, they're still here. So it could be like a sort of
Gateway?
a petri dish. Yeah, it's like a gateway drug, you know, for New Yorkers to be. But at this point, if you're a student, you're untested, you know, in that thing.
Should there be a citizenship test for New Yorkers?
I would be happy to stand at the border of New York. If I was in charge, if I was in
You
charge
should
of
build a Trump wall
Yeah.
around
No,
it.
if I was in charge of New York, here's what I would say. Here are the rules. No tourists. Totally open immigration. You can come here from any country, but you got to stay here.
Live, right.
You have to live here. So I stand there, and if someone they have like one suitcase, I'm sorry. 3 days? Absolutely not. You have to come. You can come from any country, any place in the world. You have to live here.
Is there a minimum?
Okay. You have to live here. That's
Forever.
No, but you have to be moving here. No other place to live. All the hotels that were built under the Bloomberg administration, every place there's a hotel, there's no apartment building. Okay? So hotels are for tourists. Okay? Hotels are not for New Yorkers. So all these hotels could become apartment buildings. The prices will go down. And then there'll be no tourists. And then all the things that tourists like, which no one else likes. You know, I mean, I never heard anyone say, oh, it's horrible living in this neighborhood. It's not near enough that giant M&M store. I mean, these are not. And people say, "What would you do with Times Square?" I say, "I don't know. You could have like things that New Yorkers need, like
Like New York refrigerator magnets.
yeah. I mean, these are things no one wants them except tourists.
Right.
I mean, I'm glad that these people I didn't know about these people dressed up like stuffed animals or whatever that go and take money from them and take off their shirts. I thought that is New York. Someone who thinks of that, who looks at these people and instead of just being furious, thinks, I'm going to take a couple bucks off these people.
That's a good idea. So I think we're going to open it up to questions. Is that cool? So if you raise your hand, you will be called on, and then I'll repeat the question to make sure everyone can hear it.
I'll just speak up. I don't want to go to a place where I feel you abandon the Lower East Side. I'm a homesteader, and all the things that you've also said should be under consideration, such as people who come here to stay here. I'm going to go forward. What do you think about the bag bill, which we think might be passed?
Is that like 5 cents for a bag?
I think they agreed on 5 versus 10.
Why
Did
don't they just outlaw them?
Well,
I understand.
the point is,
Why
that
we-
the New Yorkers who don't come with their own recyclables, if they have to walk out with a bag, will have to pay for it.
How don't we get paper bags instead?
They should.
Why don't we have paper bags?
The paper bags do have a shorter term, can,
They don't fly up into the trees.
no, but
They're heavier.
faster biodegradable.
Okay, I hate to be asked by the people in the supermarket, would you like a bag? I always feel like saying, no, I'm going to
Especially
juggle
when you're
these
buying,
14
like,
items.
tons of
the
oranges
22
and
blocks I have to walk
strawberries.
with them. I mean, so yes, I'm not going to carry around a bag. I'm not camping out here. So yes, you have to give me a bag, but I think if they just didn't have the plastic bags are very specific. I mean, the fact that you see them up in the telephone wire, you see them on, that doesn't happen to paper. Paper's too heavy. So, and paper is much more recyclable. So I have no plastic bags. None. Not 5 cents for a plastic bag. No plastic bags. Paper bags. I remember when there were no plastic bags. We still carried things. It's possible to carry them.
The opposite of the advice from the graduate class.
Yes, the opposite.
Classes. Anyone else? I'm sure. If not, I have a lot more questions, so. Oh, yeah.
So every new generation of New Yorker, say artist or musician or writer, you're told you can't really make it here, you can't afford it, there's no room for artists anymore, and then they find a way to create and be successful. But now it feels like we're almost approaching a critical mass, and there really isn't, particularly in Manhattan, room for the arts to grow and for artists to develop. What do you all think?
I think that people who are New York. One of the biggest changes in New York that we ever talks about is the change in self-consciousness. In other words, when I came to New York, and I wanted to be a writer. I didn't think who will help me do this. I thought no one will help me, just like no one helps me with anything else. So I didn't think like, what is the path? I just thought, figure it out. You know, I mean, so it's what is true now is that there's a kind of self-consciousness about everything. You know, I never even heard the word mentor when I was young. Who will help you? No adults paid attention to me at all except to punish me. You know, I didn't expect that anyone to be helping me out, showing me how to do it. You know, figure it out. You know, so if there are people who want to come here, is it harder now? I guess. You know, I don't know. I mean, they should, you know, maybe it certainly is more expensive, you know, but it was always the most expensive place to be. New York was too expensive for me when I came. New York is always too expensive. It doesn't matter what the dollar figures are, you know. So I don't know, you know, I also don't know anyone who says, you know what there are not enough of? Really banal books by young novelists. There are plenty. You know what? Stay home, don't come.
I just feel like I agree to the extent, you know, you're young, you want to be creative, well, be creative about this. I mean, okay, you can't live in Manhattan, so you just find where you can live. I mean, wherever you go, but the pattern will be wherever the young artist goes will be followed. The neighborhood, which was once considered forbidden, will have cachet. Real estate will come. And so wherever I go in New York, even like the most forbidding parts of Brooklyn, New Lots and East New York, you know, real estate is like water damage. I mean, you can't stop it. It's like trying to hold back a wave with your hands or push a rope. You know, it's going to, and you know, once real estate gets there, people get kicked out. And it's sort of like damned if you do, damned if you don't. I think pretty soon they're going to have to start living under the East River and you know, the Verrazano Bridge. Actually, people go to Philadelphia, and there's this district of Philadelphia. I think it's called the Liberty District. Its nickname is the Sixth Borough, because Philadelphia is only an hour and a half away. You can get a lot of space. But, you know, Manhattan, in the 70s, there was a lot of deserted space, you know, and people just made do. Well, guess what? You can't do that in Manhattan anymore. So make do wherever you're going to make do. You want to be an artist? That's hard enough. So this should not be the biggest challenge in your life, you know, where you're going to live.
I know that your father drove a cab, correct? Did you drive a cab?
No, my father, my grandfather.
And Fran, you did drive a cab.
I did, very briefly. It's a horrible job.
Okay.
I mean, it's not the horrible job it is now. I mean, when I drove a cab, there were fleets, you know, of cabs. And like one guy, I guess, owned tons of cabs. And it was a better job than it is now from a point of view of making money, but far better job. And when I drove a cab, like 99% of the cab drivers were Jewish. They were like Jewish guys, yeah, with a cap and a cigar, you know, and if you could get into a cab as a passenger, as you got in, they would go, that goddamn Lindsay, and whatever was wrong, you know, the traffic, it was the fault of Lindsay. But that, you know, those guys made a living doing that, you know, and had a family, and the wife didn't work, and you can't do that now, you know, and it's basically the same horrible job it always was, but also the shifts were 8 hours. The shifts these guys drive now are 12. Okay, the garage where I drove a cab, they pay for the gas. These guys pay for the gas. Okay, when you got the cab, it was full of gas. You didn't pay for the gas. You didn't pay for anything. It was their business, not yours. So it was a much better job, but it was still not a delightful job. And I was a young girl, so it was really not a delightful job. And
Were
especially
people shocked? Was that a big
yes,
rarity?
I mean, people were shocked. Yes, but also certain kind of person would try to tip me in joints or pay me in joints, and I would always say, I'm driving the cab for money, not for joints. Okay, no one drives a cab for fun, you know. And plus, I didn't want to be driving around with drugs in the car. But there was, and the other cab drivers were quite mean to me. I have to say, there was a cafeteria on Park
Is
Avenue.
that Bickford's?
Yeah, no, not Bickford's. What was it called? It was on
Not
Park.
Ratner's, was it?
No, it was on Park Avenue in the 20s. It was all night, and it was a cafeteria that cab drivers ate in. And so other people You know, the way that when I was young, there was some idea that truck drivers knew where to eat, like, because why, they're the greatest connoisseurs of food. And there was
The original foodies.
You could tell by their bodies, yeah.
yeah, and there was this idea, it's going to come to me, the name of this cafeteria. It was open 24 hours a day, and cab drivers ate there because, for some reason, you could park your car near there, you know. And so I would go in there to eat, and all the cab drivers would be mean to me. No one would talk to me. I had to eat by myself. I think that they felt like maybe this is the new wave. You know, these young girls with hair down to here are going to take over our fantastic jobs. But I found it to be a horrible job. But truthfully, I'm an extremely lazy person. I don't like to work. So I've never really done any work that I thought, this is fantastic. It feels like work to me. But now it's a horrible job, a really bad job.
But on the other hand, you know, if you're an immigrant coming in, I hate to hit this immigrant thing again, but that's the quickest, easiest job to get. That's like an entry job. Even though a lot of times you have to direct the cab driver. But when you talk to some of these guys and women, and you know, this guy's name is Hassan. I said, where you from? You know, they say Egypt. And, so, and then you find out this guy used to be an engineer, or this guy they were trained.
Biology professor.
The Russian cab drivers, you know, I used to be this, I used to be that. I mean, they're starting all over again. I mean, this is the immigrant story. And you just have to help them get where they're going. But you're going to hear some languages, you know, especially, you know, the African and Middle Eastern guys, they love to talk 24 hours a day. And sometimes they're on speaker and the languages, it's like Pashtun and Urdu, Wolof and Igbo. It's, but when they start talking, it's so casual, like you think, you kept going, excuse me? Then you go, not you. And they go back.
I'm always saying that.
You know, and they're talking to their wife in Karachi or something. Or their mothers, which is worse, because the mothers just, even in a foreign language, you know, that it's like a mothering mother, you know, and it'll just drive you nuts, and you beg them to, you know, just use an earbud. You don't even tell them, please get off the phone, because they might kill you, because they can't work if they're not talking on the phone.
It is funny how sometimes when you hear a foreign language for long enough, you start hallucinating that you're hearing words that you understand. Maybe that's just me. More questions? Yeah, in the back? Oh, okay, just giving a high five. Okay, yeah.
Do you guys think there is anything realistically that can be done about gentrification in New York to slow the progress? Do you think, you know, in 25 years, every apartment building is going to be a co-op and every bodega is going to be Dwayne Reed? And that's just
No, it's not going to stay like this. It doesn't stay like anything. It didn't stay like that. It's not going to stay like this, okay? It's going to change. And part of it is a fashion. You know, people used to hate New York. You know, people will hate New York again. Don't worry. You know, I mean, part of it is fashion, just the way architecture is fashion. You know, I mean, that's what I mean. But when these glass buildings come down, that will happen in my lifetime, and I'm no spring chicken. But I'm going to see these buildings come down. I know that. No, it's not going to just get. It's not on a trajectory just going one direction. You know, I mean, really as recently as 2008, there was a huge real estate crash in New York City. And one thing I noticed is that last night, walking up West Broadway, I could tell you that between a fifth and a quarter of the retail spaces in West Broadway are empty. And it warmed my heart. And the same thing is true on Madison Avenue. Now, this is caused by finally people go, no, I can't pay $180,000 a month. You know, so that means the prices are too high. They'll go down, and it'll change. It will. It's not going to just get worse and worse. It's not going to get better and better, you know. But you know, I mean, Richard's point about immigrants, you know, is very well taken because, you know, when the fashion goes away, they're going to be here, and they're always going to come here, and they come here because, frankly, we don't stop them from coming here. There's no one in New York thinks, let's make sure no one comes in, it's what New York is. You know, it is the essence of New York. It's what the country was supposed to be, but it's only New York is. So in that way, really, New York is the most American place, not the least American place.
Yeah. But
The New York values.
Yes, that's a New York value.
But my only fear is that 35 years from now, when they start tearing down the war criminal building. Preservationists will start bemoaning, like it's the Woolworth building or something. But, Henry James how's that for name dropping? In turn of the century, he wrote a sort of a spooky story called The Jolly Corner. And it was basically about a man who was a New Yorker who was living in England for a great number of years, but owned property on Irving Place, and came back and was appalled at tall buildings everywhere he looked, and he just couldn't stand it. Like, what is this thing, tall buildings? So, it's just, I'm sure there were people in Rome, you call this a forum? Where are people going to live?
Well, on that note, I think that's a great way to end it, with a nice Jewish-y joke. And thank you so much, Fran Leibowitz. Thank you so much, Richard Price. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, Penn. And
Thank you.